There probably wasn't anything more important to me when I was a kid than Dragonball Z. Coming home after school every day, turning on Toonami. If that was you in the late 90s, you probably look back and realize how awesome your childhood really was. What wasn't always so awesome, however, at least in the US at the time, was your selection of Dragon Ball Z games, and good ones at that. Today is a much different story. While some are still less than desirable, the vast majority are actually pretty good. So I've decided to pick my best of the best. Here's my top 5 list of the best Dragon Ball Z games. Kicking things off at number 5, Dragon Ball Z Raging Blast 2. Released in 2010, Raging Blast 2 takes a similar approach of its predecessor. Gameplay is virtually unchanged from the first one, with only the addition of the Raging Soul system that enables characters to reach special abilities for a short time. The game does have its shortcomings though. Galaxy Mode, which takes place of a proper story mode, has players select a character that puts them in battles that follow a mission list that's in the shape of a game board. Now, despite its lack of story, the gameplay is still top-notch, adding to what worked so well in the first one. The character list tops out at just over 100, which is one of the bigger ones next to Tenkaichi 3. Character models, while arguably are not as good as the first game, still look amazing, and that makes this a solid entry for a Dragon Ball Z game. So I thought it deserved a top 5. Coming in at number 4, Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 and Dragon Ball Z Infinite World. Now, it probably goes without saying that Budokai 3 should be on this list, but what you might be confused by is Infinite World. Then again, maybe you're not. Infinite World is basically Budokai 3, but with added characters, moves, and a different story mode. Yes, there was some minor gameplay and mechanic changes. Some improvements were good, and some of them were not so good. Improvements on movement options and fighting mechanics were a nice touch, but the change in fatigue system was terrible. The new characters and moves are always welcome. I love that. But Budokai 3 was a way more polished game, and they didn't have to make the changes they did. Despite that, both are still great games, and when it comes down to it, it's really hard to choose one over the other. It just comes down to your choice of content over polish. But either way, both games are worth having. Number 3, Dragon Ball Xenoverse. After 7 long years, Dimps finally gets another crack at a Dragon Ball game, and after Battle of Z, holy shit, let's be honest, we were ready to let him. Dimps brought in elements from Dragon Ball Heroes, the Budokai series, the Tenkaichi series, and even Dragon Ball Online, adding a full character creation and an all-new story. Creatable classes for your character include Earthling, Saiyan, Majin, Namekian, and Frieza races. The main focus of the game is taking your created character, training him, leveling him, all while completing story missions and side quests. While mostly positive, the game did have a few negatives. I thought farming for items eventually became tedious, making unlocking certain items way more of a hassle than I thought it was needed. Lastly is the roster. Now, while it's not a bad roster by any means, it still doesn't come close to the list of games Tenkaichi 3 or Raging Blast 2 that gave us a huge roster. Now, although I had a short list of hang-ups, Xenoverse is still an amazing game. I really hope that they continue to build on this, and a sequel cannot come quick enough. Number 2, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Now, I know what you're probably thinking right about now. What the f***? How is this not number 1 on your list like it is for everyone else? Here's the deal. This game is not perfect. It's still one of the best, no doubt, but the biggest reason this is number 1 for so many is roster size. Yeah, the gameplay is great, but let's be honest. The fact that this was the last great Dragon Ball Z game that we've had with such a huge roster, every game released since has just had a sense of emptiness. Don't get me wrong, it deserves a top spot on any list, because it still is the quintessential Dragon Ball Z game. But if Raging Blast 2 or Xenoverse had the roster that Tenkaichi 3 had, it would be a different story for a lot of people. I'll give credit where it's due though. 161 characters is almost the largest in any fighting game, and I still have no idea why, to this day, they haven't released an HD remaster yet. And being such a fan favorite, they are missing a huge opportunity. Okay, so before we get to the mystery that is number 1, here are some of my honorable mentions. Coming in at number 1, Dragon Ball Z, The Legend. Okay, it's a nostalgia thing, so shoot me. It still doesn't change the fact that this was a great game. In fact, a lot of the great features that we love from the newer games like Xenoverse, Budokai, and even Raging Blast, this game did first. Now back in the mid to late 90s, the selection of Dragon Ball Z games in the US was minuscule at best. The same could not be said, however, for Japan. Since its original inception in 1989 in Japan, they already had countless games, and one of those was Dragon Ball Z, The Legend. Produced and released in 1996 by Bandai for the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn, Dragon Ball Z The Legend featured 2D sprites battling in a 3D environment. This game had everything you would want in a Dragon Ball game. 3-on-3 battles, both in the air and on the ground, awesome cutscenes for special moves, and a story mode that covered the entirety of Dragon Ball Z from the Saiyan saga to the Majin Buu saga. The latter, of course, being an arc most of us in the States wouldn't actually see until the turn of the millennium. All that for 1996 was pretty fucking cool. Sadly, the game was never released in the US, but those that were fortunate enough to have a friend with a modded PlayStation was able to enjoy what others had been clamoring for during the height of the show's popularity. Thanks to my buddy Billy, I was one of those fortunate ones. Had a hell of a time getting through the menus though. Anybody who grew up in the 90s knowing there was no Dragon Ball Z games knows exactly how I feel. If you haven't tried it, I suggest you find whether it be a ROM or something and try it. And it's gonna show its age, but it's an amazing Dragon Ball Z game that I believe set the foundation of what we have today. Anyway guys, that'll wrap up my top 5 list of the best Dragon Ball Z games. Be sure to tell me what you think and what you would have changed in the comments below. Also be sure to list your top 5, I want to see those. As always guys, I appreciate you watching, I hope you all enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.